You are listening to Demystifying Organizations. In partnership with McGraw-Hill Education, I'm your host, Jeff Shatton. My guest today is Renée Mauborgne. She is a professor of strategy at INSEAD. She is also the co-director of the INSEAD Blue Ocean Strategy Institute. Mauborgne is ranked in the top 5 management gurus in the world in the Thinkers 50 listing of the world's top management gurus, a title she has held for 10 straight years. She is the highest placed woman ever on the Thinkers 50. Mauborgne served on President Barack Obama's board of advisors on historically black colleges and universities for the president's 2 terms. Mauborgne is the co-author of the 3.6 million global bestseller Blue Ocean Strategy and the follow-up Blue Ocean Shift. Blue Ocean Shift is a New York Times and #1 Wall Street Journal bestseller. Only a year out, and Blue Ocean Shift is already being published in 30 languages. The Financial Times called it one of the best-selling business books of the century, and The Economist called it the most successful book on business master planning. We discuss it today on the podcast. I hope you enjoy. I'd like to welcome to the podcast Renée Mauborgne. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Jeff. Delighted to be with you.
So, can you give an overview of what a blue ocean shift is?
Yeah, so what you find is that most organizations today are stuck in overcrowded industries, market share battles. It's tough, it's rough, it's bloody. It's what we call a red ocean. And Blue Ocean Shift is the process of corporate transformation to get you out of those red oceans of crowded industries and into new markets of uncontested with no competition, what we call the blue ocean. So Blue Ocean Shift is how do I move from the red ocean of intense competition to a blue ocean of wide open new market space.
Right. So it's a big shift from traditionally how we think of industry and markets, right? So most of the things that you'll learn in business school is along the Michael Porter model, where you're really trying to understand your own industry, what industry might be attractive, and in what way does your model or the Blue Ocean Shift ideas move beyond those classic conceptions of Michael Porter?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So if you look at the field of strategy historically, it's focused always on existing industries. And to your point, it's about how do I analyze the existing industry, position within it to capture the greatest share of that industry. And it's a zero-sum game. But what our research revealed is that that's actually only half of the universe of market space that exists. The other half are all the new industries that get created. So if we look back historically, even at, industry classification systems that governments keep track of, we find that the number of industries that have been created over time has been exploding. And so what Blue Ocean Strategy said is, why are we only looking at existing industries when we as micro actors or as the firm have the ability to create these wide open new market spaces? So we're really revealing that the market universe we focused on in the core of strategy, which is existing industries, is only half the market universe that is at our disposal to exploit and to create. And the other half are these new markets and blue oceans. And we're trying to really effectively double the landscape in the field of strategy.
So I'm going to give a specific example, and let's just walk through this one. So I did economic development work in South Africa for a while, and one of the things that we worked on was microfinance. And this was, for the most part, originated by Grameen Bank in Bangladesh by Muhammad Yunus. And what he recognized was that there was an entire, if you were to open up a new bank, you would, for the most part, be competing with, in the United States, you'd be competing with Chase and Bank of America. In Africa, you'd be competing with the other major banks. And there was this entire group of untapped consumers, which was the bottom of the base of the pyramid. In South Africa, at least, these were people living on less than $2 a day. And there was an entire millions of people that were unbanked. And so based on the model of Muhammad Yunus, I worked on a project that was helping to get financing to those people. Is that something that you would consider a blue ocean shift? How would you think of kind of the microfinance world?
So microfinance is absolutely the creation of a new blue ocean. And it's also what we talk about in Blue Ocean Shift as opposed to being disruptive. It's what we call non-disruptive creation, because you're effectively creating a market where there once wasn't any. When microfinance came along by Grameen Bank, and in your case, South Africa, it did not displace any other industry player. These were non-customers of finance and banking that the financial industry itself had precluded from becoming part of it. That was a whole new market space. So that would be the creation of a blue ocean. Now, a blue ocean shift might be more effectively. That's how, like an entrepreneurial organization, Grameen Bank at the time when it started, dove, instead of into the red, they dove straight into the blue. When we think of a blue ocean shift, though, it might be, how can an organization, now if I go to the neighboring company and I think about in Kenya, Vodafone, how they took, the red ocean industry of cell phones, they created M-Pesa, and they make a shift into this whole new market space and create this another way of creating the unbankables and making them bankable, and increasing the flow of capital in the economy. And of course, today representing, I think, over 40% of the GDP of the country, this M-Pesa. So that would be.
Yeah, I worked. Sorry. Yeah, actually, I worked on a self-help banking project that went belly up. But go on. That's also in South Africa.
Yeah. So anyway, that is, when we think of the blue ocean shift, it's about either how do I, as a startup, do a Grameen Bank and dive right into the blue, right, and unlock all these new customers and what we call new demand, right, once non-customers, and make them customers. Or in the case of Vodafone, how do we shift from a red ocean industry and start to move into the blue ocean? And they did that with M-Pesa, obviously, in Kenya, for your audience that might know what's happening in the African continent. Mm-hmm.
So what are some of the barriers to established players from making blue ocean shifts? Like we tend to think of these large established players in most industries as not being very nimble, sticking to what they know, sticking to the industry that they know well. What prevents them from moving into blue oceans?
Well, it's very interesting you said that. First of all, when you make a blue ocean shift, you don't necessarily need to move to a whole new industry, right? You can make a blue ocean shift within your industry. And in our book, Blue Ocean Shift, we even talk about how Wawa, the over 100-year-old convenience store, gas station that started in Pennsylvania is now today in multiple states, and is huge, obviously, right? I forgot how many people off the top of my head they employ. They made a blue ocean shift by applying the tools and frameworks we outline in the book expressly. But what we found is that when you talk to organizations around the world, including established organizations, and you ask any one of them, would you rather compete or create? They'll say create any day. And if you ask them, what do you think is more important for your future, compete or create? They'll say create. But then you ask them what they do and they say compete. And you say, well, why the gap between what you aspire and is important and what you actually do? And what you find out is two things. One is they don't have a roadmap. We have lots of tools about historically how to compete and how to benchmark rivals to stand out in existing industry space. But we don't have that about how to create other than random brainstorming. And that's not really systematic, nor actionable, nor predictable. And the second thing is there's the element of at the human level. So one is a practical roadmap to get you there. But the second one is that even with a practical roadmap, if human beings don't have the confidence to go on that journey with you, you're not going anywhere. So when you're moving from what is to what could be, people naturally have a sense of fear that comes up because they know how to compete, but am I capable to create that? And so you need confidence. So in Blue Ocean Shift, we outline the two things you need are, one, what we call creative competence to develop it, and that you need a roadmap with tools and frameworks to take your people there, which is what we provide. And the second thing is you need to know how to build people's confidence in that process so they'll go on that journey with you. And when we say confidence, it's not about a rah-rah call and you can do it, go for it. It's by breaking that challenge down into small micro steps so that each step they're taking, their creative competence is going up and they're willing to take that next step with you, not because they necessarily have faith in the leader, but because they've gained their own capability to think and see differently what they didn't see before. So now they're willing to go on that journey with you. So that's really the key challenge. And, as you see in Blue Ocean Shift, we have anywhere from national governments to startups, to established companies a few hundred years old that have been applying these ideas, working with ordinary people. And I don't mean ordinary by any sense of the derogatory term, but not Steve Jobs, but your standard
Right.
employee in your standard organization, not led by Steve Jobs or Elon Musk or any one of these people. And they're making that shift. And that's what really excites us, Jeff, because it is doable.
I want to talk about the confidence question. And one of the issues for a lot of executives is that their incentive structure is such that they are incentivized to just keep the status quo. And so a lot of times their compensation is literally tied to a heavy salary. There's maybe some variation in stock options, but for their own private interests, there's a tendency to want to just if it ain't broke, don't fix it for the time being. How do you get people to move beyond what might be their own private temporary self-interest, and then taking that also to having the confidence to tackle something that's more innovative?
Well, I think that's a great question. I think, we have multiple steps in the book, but the first step is, of course, you never tell people, adults, we don't like to be told, we like to self-discover. And so the first step is, get your people together and say, so many companies today, if I walk down outside on Madison Avenue right here in the 80s in New York City, the, most sexy city of America, I would argue, maybe LA can compete. But half the storefronts are empty, right? And so we're really in a red ocean. And so,
Yeah.
we see all these companies facing these difficulties, and we certainly don't want it to be us. Do you agree? Most employees will say, yeah, we don't want to close down. So
Yeah.
let's just start, because I heard there's this thing that you can shift into the blue, and I'm not sure it's true, but let's just draw this one thing. It's called a strategy canvas. And let's just see where we stand in our industry today, and have we the
Can you describe a strategy canvas?
Yeah, so it's just a simple one-page analytic that whether you're a PhD or a high school graduate, or you dropped out of school in the 9th grade, you can draw. And it's two-dimensional. It shows you on the horizontal axis all the factors you compete on in your industry and invest in. And on the vertical axis, how much buyers get, low or high. And you just sort of identify what you think you compete on. Do we have good store merchandise, nice sales help, convenient location, good return policy, whatever they might be if you're a retail store. And what do we offer lower versus high to buyers, and plot ourselves and plot the major competitors. And, let them do that. And when they do that process, they often find, Jeff, that they're really unclear on what they compete on. They have a few factors, but a lot of them they're not sure on, and they haven't really recognized. And the other thing is
Can you give an example of what it means for somebody not to understand what they compete on? Like, what are some variables that they might mess up?
So it might be in a store, the cleanliness of the store. People don't know the cleanliness of the store really matters. Or they might not know, let me think if I can think of a specific answer there.
I'll give a shot, which is at Washington and Lee. I sit in meetings where it is believed that it is important for us to compete on the size and style of the gym, and that we have $150 million high-end gym. And that might not be the case, right? It might be that we actually do not compete with other universities on gym, and that's an incidental.
Well, that's correct. No, that's a separate factor. Where
is that a fair question? Is that a fair one?
Well, absolutely. But what that reveals is, so now thank you for that. What happens when they draw these curves? And, my mind is, I've got to go back and, reiterate it. In our book, we give so many of them. But what happens is this: what you're identifying so people come up with this. So, I worked with a university as well, and they said, we compete on the gym, and we compete on the teams, and we compete on this and that and this. And really what they were doing is just taking the factors that all universities do, and not realizing that actually for their student body, they actually didn't use that. They didn't need those fancy buildings. They didn't need a lot of that. So two elements come up, but that's in the second step, where they identify factors they compete on, but which are irrelevant to their buyer group or their student group. Actually, it's not where you add the highest value. So I'm investing money in something because the competition does, and that's the way I'm rated. But actually, I could eliminate and reduce that to drop my cost structure. But on the other hand, it could be something like where people say, well, I think the website matters. And somebody will say, yes, speed matters. And someone else is talking by the website. They're talking about aesthetics. And they find out they don't agree on the term. But I'd really need to go back and think about, because you raise a good one. I should have this ready in recall in my mind about the factors where they're not even clear they compete on. Because usually what happens, Jeff, is when you ask people to identify the factors they compete on, they will actually raise their hand and say to you, that's a trick question. And I'll be like, well, wait a second. You just finished your strategic planning process. You created the strategic plan for the next 5 years and a 1 year short term. And you're telling me it's really hard to agree on what factors you are competing on in your industry. And I think, that's what starts to happen there. So, they might put excess services that no one ever uses, like for a bank, and they might forget that the teller, how fast they move people through the line, is actually what 90% of the people care about, because they're not going to use 80% of these sophisticated financial tools that most banks offer. But what they care about is that the second they walk into a bank, the teller is there with a smile on their face that recognizes your name and moves you through the line and doesn't have you waiting with 6 people deep, which is what my bank does, in doing that. So this is what that reveals. But to go back to what the strategy canvas does there, Jeff, and in our book, we count many, many stories of it, is it gets people to draw their canvas. And when they finally draw that canvas, what they tend to find is that their strategic profile looks pretty much like their competition. And then, it's for them that created it. And then for you to throw the question back, and we give those questions in Blue Ocean Shift to say, well, that's interesting. So now if we show that strategy canvas to our customers, and they saw that our strategic profile looks like our rivals, would they have a reason to buy from us or negotiate our price lower? Next question is, if we show that picture to Wall Street, would they say, I'm going to give you a great loan at a great price? Or are they going to say, I'm going to put you as a sell position or a hold position and not see your growth? And third, if I look at us, do we think we're going to have great growth prospects with that strategic profile, being like everyone else's? Or do we think that our growth prospects, especially given the competition in the market, might be challenged, and that the raises and bonuses in coming years might be not what we need it to be? And employees, now suddenly it's their issue. And they're like, oh man, yeah. And the salespeople always say they got to lower the price. It's all negotiation. It's so tough for them. And then, they think, yeah, capital is expensive, if that's relevant, given the size of your organization. You're right. Why should we have great growth prospects? So now all of us, and then the question becomes, then, do you think it's worthwhile for us to even think if there's a possibility out there? So then people say, well, and this is where they'll say, I don't know if there's a possibility. I know we're just stuck in the red. But then the next question for them is, if they're stuck in the red, is to say, well, is it worthwhile just to take one step and see if there's maybe, by applying the second tool called the buyer utility map, which is the whole buyer experience cycle on the horizontal axis and all the levers of utility, fun, low risk, customer productivity, simplicity, convenience. Do we have any blocks to utility in our industry? And let's talk to people. And then what they find when they do that second tool is that, holy smokes, we have all these blocks to utility in our industry that we never even saw, because we just are so focused on benchmarking our competition and taking the industry for granted as is. So, Jeff, today retail is getting killed, and yet Amazon keeps opening up nowadays retail stores. What is going on?
Yep.
It's that Amazon can see all the pain points so retailers blame Amazon for making them obsolete. But in many ways, existing retailers, if they draw that strategy canvas, they're going to see that they're making themselves obsolete. They haven't changed in 10 or 20 years. And then if they start looking at and going through the buyer utility map and seeing all the pain points they impose on people. Do you know how many people walk into a department store? So first of all, if I walk into a department store in America, a big major one, and I remove all the signage, I think 80% of the people will not know which department store they're in. That's how much they look alike.
Yeah, they look the same.
Second, if I even need to check out, do you know how many times, for myself personally, I have tried to maybe purchase something and I cannot find a register that's even open to purchase something. And in the end, I throw it over a rack and I walk out the store because I can't even purchase the single item that I wanted to buy. So I think what people don't realize, it's amazing how many organizations you find actually don't know their market and don't know their customer experience. So
yeah, one of the things that you write about that I think is so compelling is to get out of the data-driven, not that data is bad, but to get out of the pure data-driven models and to step into the foot of a customer and find out what is it like to be a customer for your company.
Absolutely. But it's not even for a customer, it's even the non-customers that we're really in, because your whole point, even at Microfinance, is how do I grow all new demand and pull people into my industry that have never, ever been in my industry? That's part of a blue ocean. So it's not that I'm just stealing customers from everyone else. I'm actually dramatically growing an industry or growing the new market space that I'm into by pulling people into that whole new market. And I can.
I want to go back real quick to the customer experience.
Yep.
And how there's a mismatch between the customer experience and what an organization thinks that they are. So you can often see this in a website where you go to a company's website. Let's say it's a consulting firm, and what they have listed is that they're everything. They're all things to all people. And it's fundamentally missing the right. You'll have that they're experts in 9 different industries, and that they have breadth and depth on every single area that you could imagine. When in reality, there's 8 of those industries they're not really competing in. They don't have much of a presence in. It seems that if I'm a customer looking at that, and I don't even know where to begin. I don't know what to focus on. It doesn't reach me, and there's such a pain point in looking at anything, whether that's a politician or whether that's a business who tries to be all things to all people.
Absolutely. And I mean, and what you're just articulating there, Jeff, is how many pain points. So consulting industries really now is increasingly a red ocean. It's a gentlemanly or ladylike industry in that there's always been profit. They're cautious about, competing on price. But reality is they're all pretty much the same. And yet, look at all the pain points you're just articulating right there. You don't know where to go when you get into the website. You don't know, what they really do, what actions to take. And so that's really critical there. To go back, Jeff, you're just articulating all the pain points that are in so many industries. Just like for a lot of people, just a remote control for TV. So many people don't even know. I have to ask my daughter to control it. Yeah, it's impossible.
So let's take that example. So we all know the remote control that has 30 buttons, and there's maybe 3 of them that you use, and the others that you're just baffled by. Maybe with the exception of the Apple TV remote, which is pretty simple. But your traditional TV remote. So how might they approach this?
I think what we were just saying. They find out what are all the pain points. I think in the remote control industry, and you talk to a few customers and non-customers, they're going to just love to tell you everything that is wrong with it, why it's not simple, it's not convenient. They feel it's risky if they hit the wrong button. That's happened to me sometimes. I get to some place on my on my TV that has all different things, HDMI 1, and I don't know how get back to all my whatever type of channels that I have. And so you start to uncover what are all those different pain points that you have. Then you say, well, if I simplify that, and what new people could I bring in the industry? It's the next thing I'm imagining what I could be. I mean, it's one element just for TVs, right? Remote control is just one small point of a television's whole product they're selling it because it comes with a TV. But then I'm starting to reimagine, what that TV space can be for offering something, the simple TV that always works or whatever it might be. Yeah.
Can you talk about the Citizen M hotel case? I think it's a phenomenal example of your system.
Okay, well, Citizen M is a great hotel chain. They were an entrepreneurial company, not an established organization, and they looked at the industry of hotels, and it is so bloody red that you can't imagine it. So there's, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1-star hotels. And if you draw their strategy canvas, you find out 5-star hotels they all compete on the same factors, all 5-star, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. And 5 stars just offer a high level and a high price across the board, and 4 stars all the same, and 3, 2, and 1. So you have there could be thousands of players, but all 5 stars basically look alike from buyer's point of view. 4 stars look alike, 3, 2, 1-star players look alike. And, they went out to the market to find all the pain points. And as they start to look at it, they find out that, almost no one wants to deal with a front desk. No one enjoys that experience. People want to get straight to the room. And, another pain point, no one wants to pay for the internet once they get there, and yet that's an added on service. And, the room service is so expensive. And most people today for the traveler don't really want the bellhop that comes and takes your bag and takes, 25 to 30 minutes to bring it to your room, even though you say, please bring it straight up. And then when they do, you have to tip them as well, and you don't have money and you're tired after a trip. So they found out that so much of what the industry, the food in the restaurants, in the hotels is normally very expensive and not very good. And they found out so much of what the industry competes on doesn't add much value. And even in a room, even in a 1-star hotel, you've got furniture, you have all this. And they found out that the average person just wants a gorgeous bed, great sheets, and a wonderful shower and quiet. That's about it. And
and it seems remarkable that this wasn't figured out or hasn't been figured out when there's billions and billions of dollars on the line for a 5-star hotel. And they're spending tens of millions of dollars on, let's just use the front desk example, something that customers don't even like.
Yes.
So how has this not been noticed? Given that we all know, like pretty much anybody listening would probably agrees, like that the front desk experience is not something that you look forward to or that you would even want at all.
That's right. Jeff, your question is as good as mine, right? Because people benchmark each other so much in the existing industry and want to keep up and take the status quo, the existing factors they compete on, for granted, that they don't challenge it. And the second factor is how few people, and I really mean this in organizations, really go to the market to learn. When they go, if they go to sell and to convince people, as opposed to they go to learn in the market. So,
it's the power of listening, right? Which we're all really bad at, as I cut you off.
Well, it's not only listening though, Jeff, it's asking the right questions, because people are as bright or as dumb as the questions we ask them, right? So if we say, how can we improve the front desk experience, I'm driving the questions to improve that experience. And it's not for the customer to say, by the way, what you should really do is eliminate it, because they're not getting paid to do your job. You're the one collecting the paycheck. You do the work. Don't ask me. I've got my own job to do. But if I ask them a different sets of questions, so one of the tools in Blue Ocean Shift is what we call the eliminate, reduce, raise, create factor framework. And it's asking people, could we eliminate this? So it's changing the questions that you ask people, which allows, when you talk to customers and non-customers, to come up with very different answers than they would under traditional questions that you do in market research. So market research tends to be a little bit more about refining the factors that exist, as opposed to even challenging and rethinking what those factors could be. And that's the job, not for a focus group to do, by the way. That's the job for the company to do. It's what you're getting paid to do, right? So why should we expect the customer to figure out our industry and our business for us? Because that's not what they're paid for. And so this whole idea, we're going to go to the market and they're going to tell us everything. No, it's like, I need to go with some frameworks that are guiding my questions. And in that, meet with people and help them and help me create the insight from that. And so I think that's the other factor at play.
Yeah. So in research, this would be our hypothesis development.
Yeah, it would be hypothesis development. Yeah.
Right. Right. So you come in with a hypothesis, and what I think is so powerful about the framework, and I just want to go back to the hotel example, is that if you ask customers, what do you think about the front desk experience? They're going to say, "Oh, I hate the lines. I wish those were shorter. I wish they greeted me with a smile." And so, if all you do is ask, then your recommendation, going back to the executives of the company, is let's institute some HR policies, and let's do a better job on queuing, so that we have more representatives up front. And what your model is saying, and it applies obviously way beyond just a hotel, is that what if you could do something that's going to be both cheaper and better for everybody? And obviously it's hard to get to that, and you have incredible frameworks with which to think through this. But that's what it does to get rid of the front desks, where it's a pain point for people, but it's also an expense. So it's very expensive to run these front desks, and people don't like it. So if you can get rid of that and put in a kiosk, or probably ultimately just done on your cell phone, like you do with Airbnb, that's better and it's cheaper.
Faster. Well, here's the thing. You hit on one point. The way you open up a blue ocean, and it doesn't matter what example we're giving in our book, is you're pursuing differentiation and low cost simultaneously. And when most people think, oh, I want to do something to stand out, they're always talking about what I can add to what I currently do. And what that does is it's raising your cost structure in the process, but it's keeping. So when hotels, you say, why don't they learn from this? When hotels try to stand out, they traditionally take the existing industry as given, that you have to have a certain room size, they have to have certain type of furniture within it, that you should have a certain type of restaurant in the lobby, that your lobby should look like X, that you should have a front desk. There's all these factors. And this is not just hotel industry. This is in almost every industry, right? The standard protocol. If I look at art auction houses, they're all identical in the world. I go into retail banks around the world, they're identical. When I go to gas stations around the world, they're identical. They take the existing factors and they operate based on that. And if by chance they start doing a little market research, tendency what they'll do is they'll try to optimize those existing factors a bit, or they might add one factor to it and raise it. But what Blue Ocean Strategy and Blue Ocean Shift does, and the tools and frameworks are doing, they're continuously driving you expressly to focus on as much as what you can eliminate and reduce as what you can raise and create, to simultaneously be different in the marketplace and low cost. Why is Amazon, you have the market capitalization, and why do we love it that we do, or the average person does? It's both differentiated and it's low cost for human beings, right? So that is what the whole premise does. And if I go back, to the field of strategy for a second, you think about the typical assumptions companies make. First thing they do is they take the existing industry for granted, as though they can't change it. But every single day, industries are being reshaped by individual firms, and industries were created by individual firms. And the first step in Blue Ocean Strategy and Shift is realizing that as individual firms created industries, they can shape them. What do I do the second I know that? I have now expanded my opportunity horizon to thinking, how can I beat the competition? To how can I open up something wider? And so what you find is, if I think I need to make a trade-off between differentiation and low cost, guess what? I'm going to make that trade-off. And if I believe and I drive my organization as Citizen MDIM through the Blue Ocean Shift process, that I'm going to break that trade-off, and I push my people, at first they're going to push back and they're going to say, you can't break that trade-off. And you keep pushing, try it again. Suddenly, oh, wait a minute, you know what? Come to think about it, no one liked that front desk. I can eliminate that. Actually, guess what? People don't need a big room. They could care less, but they want a great bed. And guess what? A great bed is a heck of a lot cheaper than real estate space. And if we shrink the room and make the bed better, we've lowered the cost, have ability to build more rooms, and delivered this beautiful bed with beautiful linens at the same time. And so, the whole process is driving us to understand what assumptions are we making every day that we don't even know we're making? You know, it's interesting, Jeff. Years ago, I was with a big music industry player, and they were so upset because of Napster at the time. So it's going back. And Napster, free digital music.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, their whole money came from selling CDs, and they were so mad. They're like, I can't believe it. It's free. That's why it's taking over. So then I hand out CDs to people in the room, and I ask them, open it, open the CD. No one could open the CD because there's wrapped so tightly. You can't open them. And then when you finally open the plastic, around the lip is not like a Post-it note. It's this glued label that you cannot peel or anything. And you can't open it. If you don't have scissors, you pull the lid so hard that the plastic cracks. And
I'd like to do the same thing with almost every kid's toy.
yeah. So I say,
just fighting to open up these toys.
yeah, and getting all the little twisters off. So I said, you know, you can't even open your product, and that's within 1 minute. And you're blaming Napster? Like, you are making yourself irrelevant. And what the process does, that's actually very empowering, because when you realize that it's not the world that creates your future, you actually have a very big hand in that. And you stop blaming outside factors and you take control and responsibility for it, which is what that first step strategy canvas makes you see. It's not the world. It's not that you have this.
Yeah, it's really an empowering. It's really an empowering.
Yeah,
framework.
and you know, you said existing organizations maybe are afraid to do it. I want to tell you, when they do that and they go step by step and they start to see it, despite what their incentive system is, which is your starting question, and they start to discover the pain points in their industry, what they take for granted and what they've assumed, and it becomes explicit to them, their energy mounts, their excitement, and what they start to discover, the reason that they often are hesitant to move forward is not only they don't have a roadmap, but that point of fear. But when I start to see all those pain points, when I start to see all the way we cause ourselves problems, I can then learn to start getting in my own way to create a powerful strategy. And that's what, you know, the blue ocean tools and process. And I think that's why the power of it is because whether you're a startup or an established company, you can start to apply those tools and frameworks to shift from the red to that blue ocean. Whether I'm nonprofit, a French fry maker, consumer electronics, or a hairdresser on Main Street, you can start shifting.
I want to talk just a little bit about decision making under uncertainty. And so you write about that, you know, companies should predict trends. And so I think of something like Moore's Law, right, where computer power doubles every 18 months to 2 years. And so we can think of that as a trend that's never going to reverse. It might slow down, but, you know, in 20 years, computing power is going to be far greater than it is today. But what do you do about trends that are much more uncertain? I think of oil prices or government regulations, which can change based on an election or some major global event that you can't possibly predict, but that can majorly shift markets. So given extreme uncertainty, how should a company approach these trends that would impact a blue ocean?
So, you know, first of all, we don't recommend building a strategy based on unpredictability, right? So, you know, in our book, when we have the 6 ways to create blue oceans, as you articulate, one is looking across time. And we say you really only want to build a strategy based on a trend that's, you know, irreversible, that will decisively impact, you know, your own business and it's moving down a clear trajectory. It's not left, right, center, all over the place. So, you know, to your question there, you know, that's what you have. People in, whether it's in finance, they have risk management that they're doing for hedging financial issues of their company's earnings, and different elements there. But I would not build my strategy based on that. But one thing is pretty constant, and that is, you know, and that goes to step 2, imagine what you could be, and that is what people care about. And this is whether the people are a corporate purchaser or an individual for a B2C business. we are all looking for things that make our life convenient, low risk, fun, maybe environmentally friendly, maybe where we have a mission, a simple, easy to use, make us more productive. Those are constants, right? What our objectives are.
Mm-hmm.
And what we're talking about, whether you're a French fry maker or you're a consumer electronics maker or a shoemaker, you want to start thinking about those constant variables. There'll be times when people, when there's a financial crisis, will have less to spend on everybody's items. But if I am in that blue ocean and I'm differentiating low cost, if they have $1 to spend, they're spending it on me. They're not spending it on you in the red ocean. So actually, when we did Blue Ocean Strategy, we did the expanded edition after 10 years in 2015, because it came out in 2005. We went back because a financial crisis happened in between that launch and the 215. And all the companies that were in the blue ocean not only had continued to perform well, even during the crisis, they were buffeted much better than anyone else. So, we're all going to be on some of these more macro things where there's a war or something crazy happens with oil prices. These are things we're going to have to deal with. I'm not going to build my strategy. I might build my financial risk management strategy based on that, but not my corporate positioning strategy based on that. But what the best way to insulate yourself when these oscillations happen and not everyone has money on the table is, I'm going to tell you, to be different and low cost at the same time. And the power of that is when I get the world to be my marketing force for me, because that's where, when I have that, 5-star ratings, not 2-star ratings on Amazon. That's when people blog about me. That's when people do, a podcast on me. Mm-hmm. That's when the megaphones of the world start talking about me, as opposed to me only talking about myself and how great my product or service is. So, we believe passionately, and we've seen it time and again, even in the throes of difficulties, where those are the companies that are most secure, or organizations, to ride out the volatilities we see.
All right. Well, I just want to thank you so much for coming on the podcast. This has been an absolute joy, and I've really, really enjoyed our conversation.
All right. Well, thanks so very much, Jeff, and best of luck to you in your endeavor.
Thanks for listening to the podcast today. If you have any questions or comments, you can email me at jeffshatten1@gmail.com. You can tweet me at jeffshatten. If you like this podcast, press the subscribe button and make sure to rate it on iTunes so that other people can find it.